so the blood can just directly go from the right side to the left side and enter the enter the body. Okay, but as soon as you take your first breath, what happens? The two layers come together and unite, and now you have a solid wall. There's no hole in it. But what happened in his, as when he took a breath, they did not come together, and the hole persisted, basically. Okay, that's what happened in him. Okay, do you guys understand the heart structure? Now let's talk about the valves a little bit more in detail. We have two classes of valves, correct? What are the two classes of valves? Two main types of valves. Yes, so semi-lunar and AV valves. So we have the AV valve and the semi-lunar valve. The AV valve is split up into two valves. Okay. You have the right and you have the left. You have the right and you have the left, correct? But there's actually specific names for them. You don't call it the right AV valve. It is right if you call it, but there are specific names. The right AV valve is called a tricuspid. Tricuspid. And the left AV valve is called a bicuspid. Or the mitral. Or the mitral valve. Bicuspid or the mitral valve. The semi-lunar, the right one is called the pulmonic or the pulmonary. And the left one is called aortic. Aortic valve. Okay? So it's called pulmonic or pulmonary valve, that one's called aortic. Tricuspid valve or bicuspid or mitral, it's the same valve, just two different names, pulmonic or pulmonary or the aortic. Now, the structure. The reason these are called semi-lunar valve because they look like a half moon, okay? Basically, they look like that. Do you see that it looks like a half moon? Okay, this is why they're called semi-lunar. Okay? Now, AV valve actually has different components. AV valve has three components. It has a cusp. It has a papillary muscle. And it is the chorda. Yes. Okay? There are three parts of an AV valve. So when you look at an AV valve, it has three parts to it. It has a cusp, it has the papillary muscle, it has chorda tendineae. Now, regardless if I'm talking about the tricuspid or bicuspid, they have the same three structures. Okay? What do you think the function of the valve is? What do you think the function of the valve is? Huh?
Keep it moving one way.
To keep the blood flow in one direction. So if when blood goes from, let's say, the atrius into ventricles, blood should not come back into the atrius. Does that make sense? It's to prevent backflow of blood. Now, here is my ventricle. Okay, here's my ventricle. Extending from my ventricle, okay, are basically our capillary muscles. These papillary muscles are smooth muscles. From my papillary muscles, I have these cord-like structures extended. These cord-like structures are called chorda tendineae. Okay? And then, from these chorda tendineae, I have the cusp. Okay? Does that make sense? So, tell me, did I draw the bicuspid valve or the tricuspid valve? Bi. Because one complete cusp and second complete cusp. The tricuspid would have a third one coming out. Does that make sense? So here's a ventricular wall. Attached to the ventricle are these papillary muscles, they're bulky muscles that you will see when you look at the heart. Attach them on little cord-like structures, little strings, okay? And basically, then from the strings are these cusps, okay? And these three structures completely make up an AV valve. Has anybody ever flown a kite or seen a kite? You know you have that railing that contains the, not the yarn, what is it called? The string that the kite is attached to. So the kite itself would be the cusp. That string that you can pull on and manipulate the kite, that is chorda tendineus. And that, I don't know what it's called. Yeah, that actually contains all of the string is actually the papillary muscles, and your hands holding it would be the ventricle. Does that make sense? Okay?
There's multiple kinds of cusps, so there's the bi and tri,
Yes, there's two.
and that's it, just those two?
Yeah. Now, I forgot to say one thing in here. This is the thickness, okay? That's why I draw this again. I forgot to tell you about the thickness. Now, when you compare the right side to the left side, okay, when you compare the thickness is made up of myocardium. The thickness is made up of myocardium, or by the myocardium. And you know myocardium is cardiac muscle, right? This interventricular septum or the interatrial septum, the septum is also made by the myocardium. Okay? So the thickness of a chamber plus the septum is made by myocardium. When you compare the right side to the left side is generally more thicker than the right side of the heart. Okay, left side is more thicker than the right side of the heart. When you compare the atrias and the ventricles are thicker than the atrias in general. Does that make sense? When you compare right side and left side is more thicker, but when you compare atrias and the ventricles are more thicker. So do you see that the left ventricle would be the thickest because it's on the left side and it's a ventricle? Okay. Second thickest would be the left atrium. Third thickest would be the right ventricle. The fourth thickest would be the right atrium. Right atrium is very thin. Now, because the right atrium is very thin, okay, it does not have that much muscle. You have a special band in it. Okay, let's say, let me draw it. This band extends this way. Okay, it's called the moderator band. Moderator band, it actually, when you look at the heart, it will look like a thick branch going from one side of the right atrium extending to the other side. Because the right atrium is so thin, this moderator band is there to hold it together, so it doesn't like kind of flips out and break apart. Does that make sense? Okay? It's a moderator band. Okay. You only find the moderator band in the right atrium.
What did you say it was?
It basically, because the right atrium, the wall is so thin, because the muscle is so thin, it kind of holds it together. So therefore the right atrium doesn't like break apart. So the ventricle, it will have the papillary muscles, chorda tendineus, and the cusp. And this shows you the image. You could see this right here is a ventricle. This is the lumen of the vessel, regardless if we're talking about the pulmonary trunk or the right ventricle or left ventricle in the aorta. These are the semilunar valves. As you can see, it looks like a half moon. Okay, that's why they're called semilunar valves. This right here shows you the AV valve. So right here, you can see the papillary muscles, thick muscles. Extending from them, these are string-like structures or cord-like structures, which are called chorda tendineus. And then you have the valves or the cusp right here. Okay, cusp will look like that. It's kind of hard for me to see that, of course. Okay. So it shows you what the AV valve looks like and what the semi-lunar valve. Now, the heart that I drew, okay, my beautiful heart, that's not exactly what the heart looks like in real life, okay? I'm not an artist, therefore I just draw a typical heart that everybody can recognize. This is what the heart actually looks like. Now, take 5 minutes to figure out what all of these structures are, okay? With the group member. Actually, instead of this, let's do this one first, and then we'll come back to that. Yes. Okay, if I call your name, I'm not going to call it, there's only a few students who I need to talk to. If I call your name, when class ends, you need to come and see me. Okay? Paige, Jamie, Fuller, okay? John Dickerson. Okay, those 3 students need to see me after class. Okay, so what is A and B? What's A? Inferior vena cava. B? C? D?
AB.
Which one? We have 2 types.
Tricuspid.
Tricuspid. What is E?
Wait, what was D? D was tricuspid?
D is tricuspid. Okay. E? Right ventricle. F?
Semilunar valve.
Which one?
Pulmonary.
Pulmonary semilunar valve. G?
Pulmonary trunk.
Pulmonary artery or pulmonary trunk. What is H?
Pulmonary vein.
Pulmonary vein. J?
Left.
Left atrium. K? Bicuspid. L? Left ventricle. M? N?
Aorta.
I?
Septum.
O? those interventricular sepals. Now try to identify these structures. Try to not make an answer.
So we have two similar.
You have two 80 valves, you have two 10 on one side.
So the 80 valves will be tricuspid, bicuspid, and then our semi-winners, aortic. So those are the, oh, aortic. Okay, thank you.
What is B? I'm going to skip around. What is B? C? D? E? F? I'll come back to G. H? I? What is A? Explain this. Which one?
Pulmonary.
And what is G?
Aortic. Some other.
Now, when I draw, when I do, because I can't write, I drew it right here. It doesn't come off, excuse me, right there. It actually comes off from the side. Ah. What is J? What is L?
Pulmonary.
Pulmonary vein. What is K?
Aorta.
Now, it's actually a arch of aorta. As you can see, it comes off and it arches, right? When it arches, it actually gives off different vessels. Now, what is this part? So let's do 1, 2, and 3.
Papillary muscle.
Papillary muscles. What is 2?
Cordia tendina.
Chorda tendineae. And 3?
Cusp.
Make sense?
Say that again.
Papillary muscles, papillary muscles, chorda tendineae, cord-like structures, and then the cusp. All those 3 structures make up the AV valve. Ready with this? Okay, now the cardiac wall. When I look at a cardiac wall, regardless if I'm looking at a right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, they tend to have different layers. That wall has different layers. Okay? Here's the lumen. This is the space where the blood would be. The innermost layer, the layer that actually comes in contact with the blood, is called the endocardium. Endocardium. Endocardium is actually made up of epithelium. Okay? It's epithelial tissue. So the innermost layer is the endocardium. Now, the endocardium makes up the innermost layer and also makes up the valves. So the semilunar valve, the AV valves are made up of endocardium. Okay? Or the cusp. For the AV valve, the papillary muscle, the muscle, but the chorda tendineae and the cusp itself is actually made up of endocardium, the epithelium. Okay? This is why you have a disease called endocarditis. This is where the valves don't function. It's inflammation of the valves. Therefore, it's called endocarditis because it's made up of the endocardium. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, the second layer, this one is myocardium. It's the thickest layer. So it's cardiac muscle. The second layer is myocardium. So endocardium, then myocardium. Then you have this third layer, which is epicardium. This third layer right here is called epicardium. It is made up of connective tissue. So the 3 layers are endocardium, myocardium, epicardium. Those are the 3 layers. Now, do you see there's a space, right? See if you just don't write anything, look at me.